So we are going to start the training with Alice Yanda, our product owner. So Alice, you can start now.
Thanks, Elodie, and welcome everyone to our antenatal module webinar. Thanks for being with us today during your lunchtime. And I'm going to start right away. Just as a reminder for those of you who are joining us for the first time, who might not remember how to ask a question, you can use the webinar's console on your right margin. So on the right side of your screen, you should see a section called questions, and you can simply type in that section. And there are members of the team in the background that can answer you during the presentation. And we'll also be selecting a few questions to answer orally at the end of the presentation. The agenda for today, I want to present our guiding principles that determined how we developed our antenatal module. Then I'll present our main features before showing you what they look like in MYLE. Then I'll go through some frequently asked questions, and at the end we'll take the time to answer any questions that you might have had during the presentation. So we have 4 guiding principles that helped us develop the feature. First thing we were aiming for was efficient documentation. So we made it such that we're retrieving any information that's already on file, and we're eliminating any double entry so that the documentation of the visit is very efficient and you can spend more time with your patient instead of just typing on the obstetrical file. The next thing is that we respected the ministry's forms. So the compliance is actually imposed by the Ministry of Health and Social Services. So we respected the 4 pages of the obstetrical files, and that's what you'll see integrated in MYLE. And so the format will be very familiar to you. You'll see it as I show you in MYLE. The third thing is, and this is what we've been doing for our main features within MYLE, is we have a pilot project during which we deploy the feature to a restricted number of clinics that are our first testers, and they give us feedback. And based on that feedback and comments and requests, we make adjustments to the feature before we deploy it globally. So the feature that I'll be showing you today already has many improvements that we made based on feedback that we got from our users. And finally, it's a feature that's going to be available to all. So all MYLE clinics that want to use the obstetrical file and the obstetrical module will be able to have access to it. It's included in your base license, so there's no additional fee. And you'll be able to have it in the next coming weeks. We have 4 main features that I want to describe. First and most obviously is the obstetrical file itself. So we integrated pages 1 to 4 of the obstetrical record, and it'll be directly in your note within MYLE in a rich format. So the objectives of that is, first of all, we want to be saving any information documented in the obstetrical file in a granular way. And what that means is that in our database, we're really able to see exactly what you recorded for every single field within the file. So we know, for instance, the cycle length that you documented on the file. We know with precision everything that was documented. And having that file within the note also facilitates access to the rest of the record. So if you want to be consulting a patient document, for instance, or if you want to chart or prescribe medication, you'll have access to that all within the same screen instead of having to go between your obstetrical file and the record back and forth. And you'll see that it's available in the forms section of the note. The second feature is reusing vital signs. So we linked the vital signs entered in the note to those that are entered in the obstetrical record. And the objective of that was to avoid you having to document that information in both places. So now if it's documented within the notes section in the vital signs, you'll see that that same information will be reused and appear automatically in your obstetrical file. And that'll also make it such that vital signs that are entered directly on the obstetrical record are actually saved in a granular way in the vital signs section of the file. So that information, when it used to be recorded on the PDF forms, it used to really only live on the form, and it wasn't available within the vital signs section of the patient chart. So you couldn't, for instance, see the trend in vital signs during the pregnancy. So now, since that information is saved in the vital signs section, we'll have access to the information granularly. And so that'll apply to the height, the weight, and the blood pressure. All those values are going to be bidirectionally linked between the note and the obstetrical record. The third feature, and I think it's my favorite and it might be your favorite too, is that we included an estimated due date calculator. So we'll automatically calculate the estimated due date of the patient, either based on the date of last menstrual period or based on the ultrasound data, depending on where we're at during the pregnancy. And two main objectives of that, first of all, obviously is to accelerate documentation, so you won't have to be doing that calculation manually. And since the calculation will be automatic, it'll also avoid mistakes. So there are a couple conditions for the ultrasound dating. Once you have a date for the ultrasound and the information is documented, you'll be able to select it for dating, and that information gets added automatically on page 4. And the gestational age gets calculated automatically according to the estimated due date that's selected for each visit. Fourth feature is responsive printing. And what we mean by that is that on page 4, will allow you to document as much text as necessary in the treatment and remarks section, because we know that often that box isn't big enough for all the information that you want to write. So you'll be able to write as much information as you want, and the box will extend down. And then when we print, we'll print according to the amount of text that was entered in that field, so that we always are printing every single thing that you wrote. And obviously the objective is to let you really document anything that's relevant to the follow-up, so that you're not running out of space. So that being said, I'm going to show you what it's going to look like in MYLE once it's deployed in your environment. So this is a test environment, and let's imagine that I'm logged in as a physician, and I only have 2 appointments today. And my first one is for a first visit for pregnancy with Miss Julia Reeder here. So I'm going to access her file. And as you'll see, the note was already created by the nurse that I work with. So it was already charted. And if I access this note, I can see that the vital signs were already charted here. So if I modify here my note, we'll see that I have the option to create a new pregnancy in the file. And when I click here, the first time I click, if you're in a file that already had some old pregnancies documented on PDF form, to facilitate transition from the PDFs to the new module, what we'll do is we'll present any forms that were on file that you can select to view in parallel. So if there's the last form that you want to view, perhaps to go get some information that was charted on page 1 and to be able to reuse that, you can select it if you'd like, and you can click on continue. And by doing that, the old form will appear in a new tab. Well, this one is empty because it's a test file, but you can imagine that if there were relevant information, for instance, family history that you want to recuperate, then you could do that by copy pasting at least the information. Now, this will only happen the first time you create a new pregnancy for a given patient, because from that point on, if there's a new pregnancy, we'll be able to go and retrieve that information directly from the obstetrical file that was previously documented within the new module. So that's one of the advantages of this new feature, is that we'll be able to get that information for you the next time there's a new pregnancy. Okay, so this is the obstetrical file. Its format is exactly the same as on the PDFs. The only thing we did to facilitate documentation and lessen the amount of scrolling that you need to do is we organized the pages in tabs so that you can navigate from one to the next simply by clicking on the page name. So all the patient information and the clinic information is loaded directly into the file. So that's the latest information that's on file will always appear right here. If ever there's a relationship that's documented in the relationships tab for the spouse, we can also retrieve that information automatically. So here, Mr. Shane Wilson was the spouse of the patient. We already have that information as well as his age. And if ever there's a phone number that's on file, we can also retrieve that. Now, throughout the obstetrical file, we added the ability for you to create clickable texts. So anytime you see select from list in a field like this, you can click on it and create clickable text. Now, for those of you who don't use clickable text or don't know what they are, I'm just going to give you a brief overview. If I click on select from list, I can create different tabs. And now this is a very basic example. I'll show you one that's a little bit more detailed later on. But these allow you to create shortcuts for things that you would be typing often. So instead of retyping always the same diagnoses or always the same relationships, for instance, you could have them configured as clickable texts. And then instead of typing, I can simply click, and then that gets added to my field as I just did. So if, for instance, the mother had colon cancer that I want to document, then I just avoided typing mother for myself by having these clickable texts. This is a small example, but if some diagnoses happen or come across often, you could also have those as clickable texts. And another good thing is that if ever you have a colleague that's really great at documenting these, they can also share them with you. So that's information that can be shared within your clinic very easily. And so anytime within the file that you see select from list, I won't go through them all, but you can always imagine that you can configure some templates for those sections. For the personal antecedents and all of these different grids we have in page 1, we tried to facilitate or speed up documentation for you. So what we did is that anytime that you click on a diagnosis, for instance, if my patient had a previous surgery, I can simply click on previous surgery, and a plus and a 1 gets added automatically to this box. If I click on a second one, for instance, she also has asthma, then a plus gets added to indicate that it's abnormal, and a 2 gets added because it's a second diagnosis that I've clicked on. And so these numbers can be useful if you want to come specify something about whatever you selected as abnormal. For instance, if I want to say she had a tonsillectomy in 1999, that's something that you wanted to document, you can easily reference the diagnosis that you had marked as abnormal in that way. Of course, if that's not the way you document things and you'd rather work in a different way, you can also type in this box. So if you'd rather just write a plus, you can also do that by typing. Once you've gone through all the questions, if you've marked everything that you wanted to mark as abnormal, you have this shortcut to mark anything that's empty as negative. So by clicking on this link, you get zeros that are added everywhere to indicate that all of those are normal, and you probably asked the question already. So you can use those as shortcuts. Moving on to the menstrual history section. In the cycle length, we always put 28 days by default. Once again, if you want to override that, if it's longer or shorter, you can always change the information. And then once you add a date of last menstrual period, for instance, in August, once that gets added, my estimated due date gets calculated automatically. And it's based on the date of last menstrual period and also on the cycle length. Now, if the cycle length is variable, if maybe it's unsure, then you can also choose to base the calculation of the estimated due date on a fixed cycle length of 28 days. So to do that, you can simply click on ignore number of days in cycle. And when I click this, see how my date just got changed to the 1st instead of the 4th. So it recalculates based on 28 days instead of 31, if that's what you would prefer using. In the previous pregnancy section, we already have information that was on file, and I'll show you where this is stored in a moment. So there's already information that I can recuperate from previous pregnancies right here. So maybe one was to term, and I can update it to say that the child is also alive. For my previous pregnancies, at the moment, I'm only showing one empty line, but of course you can document more. So as soon as you start documenting a first previous pregnancy, once that information gets added, a new line is generated automatically. The line also gets numbered for you, so you don't even need to do that. Then in these different fields, perhaps she gave birth at home at 40 weeks. There are some shortcuts that we did include for you. So for method of delivery, when you click in this field, we already have some options that are the most common options that you might come across. So perhaps it was a spontaneous vaginal delivery. You can simply click on that and it gets added. Of course, if there's something more you want to specify, you can also type and add extra information next to what you selected. Same thing for type of anesthesia. If I click in the field, I get some options here. So I can quickly document, but I can also type anything more specific. And same thing for the sex. For the field for mass here, by default, we're going to use the units that are your preferred system of units as base, and we base ourselves on your settings. So if I'm more comfortable in pounds, by default, the unit will be selected as pounds. So maybe baby was born at 8.4 pounds, but if someone else is more comfortable with kilos, or if I want to know what the equivalent is in kilograms, I can click on the other unit and the conversion will be done automatically. And one thing to note is that the PDF form specifies kilos as units, and so before printing the information, we'll convert any value into kilos so that it's based on kilograms, and that's what's written in the PDF as well. I'm going to go quickly in the rest of this section because these grids here are documented exactly as I showed you for the personal history. So I can click on an element and a +1 gets added. That's the same thing for lifestyle and environment as well. At the bottom in the signature section, any contributor to this page gets their name added to the field. So if I'm collaborating with a resident or a nurse that also wrote in the file, both our names will appear here and the consultation date gets added automatically as well. Instead of scrolling all the way up to click on page 2, I can also just click next here and I'm brought to page 2 automatically. And now remember I had told you that the nurse had already written the vital signs here in the note, so they were already charted. So I don't have to rewrite them in my obstetrical file because we can just pull those in automatically. So my BP, my current weight and height, they're already there for me and I don't have to rewrite them or even retake them if I don't want to. For the weight before pregnancy, if I have values on file, when I click here, the last 3 values for the patient's weight will be displayed. So I have a value from 2019. Maybe that was the latest weight. And so I can just click and add it if maybe the patient doesn't remember what her weight was before pregnancy, or it's just an easier way to document it this way. And you'll see that the pre-pregnancy BMI got calculated automatically based on my height and my weight. For the rest of the physical exam section, I don't have much to say except that we did add shortcuts for normal values here. So if ever the exam is normal, you can simply click. Then if you have something to write or to specify something that's abnormal, then you can type the specificities. For cytology, one thing we also did is that we display the last completed pap test information if we have that within the preventive activities section. So if I know when it was last completed and it was done at the beginning of the year here, that can help inform whether or not I consider this to be done or not. So that information will be pulled directly into the file, so you don't have to go back to the medical summary to check when the last pap test was if you already have it on file. For the risk factors and treatment plan, one thing that might be interesting is you can create templates for every single risk factor. So if you always have the same plan for a patient that has hypertension or that has diabetes, you can configure those templates and just document what the plan is for the patient based on that. I'm going to go to the next page. So page 3 is for results. Now, since this is a first visit, maybe I don't have that many results to document yet, but I do want to show you a couple of things we included. So we also have clickable text here as well. So if I click on urine, for instance, we have different options for culture or the analysis that I could click on. For the mother's blood type, we also included these just as quick links that you can add. And then for immunity, positive, negative are already there as clickable text. For the ultrasound, I'm not going to document it on this visit because this is a first visit, but I will show you how to create a follow-up later on. So I'll show you how to use this section in just a moment. And then in these possible discussion topics, there's nothing much more to add. It's a section that you probably know well. You can create clickable text once again. When I click next and come to page 4, for the very first visit, since I already have vital signs on page 2, I can choose to reuse them on page 4 if that's what I want to do, or if I'd rather retake the blood pressure or retake the vital signs, I can choose to create some new ones. So for me, I'm going to reuse them. Oops, this is a mistake in my test file. My number of pregnancies is 2, so we see this information on top here. And then you'll see that in this grid, we pulled out the weight before pregnancy, just because the grid was already heavy enough. So it'll display on top here. And once again, you can convert the units if you'd like to. And you'll notice that in my estimated due date section, my date of last menstrual period is automatically selected because that's the information I have for now. And that makes it such that I can also calculate my weeks of gestation automatically. And that's based on the estimated due date and today's consultation date that also gets added to the file. You'll also see that the weight and blood pressure got added automatically, and so did my initials here because I documented this line. Only thing I want to add for these different fields is that in presentation, I know that a lot of you on paper used to draw the presentation of the fetus. And so what we did to mimic that is that if you click in this section, you'll see that we included different symbols that might describe how the fetus is positioned. And we also have breech, transverse, and cephalic here for the different other presentations. We didn't want to find symbols for every single permutation, but we included some common ones that might help you here. Now, I think 9 weeks might be a little too early to document presentation, so I won't add it here, but I just wanted to show you that that was an option. Now, earlier I was mentioning that we made some adjustments to this treatment or remarks section because I know it's normally pretty small. So I'll show you how you can document how much you want. And I created some clickable text for this section. So if I click on select from list, and this is something that you might want to do, I charted some clickable text for my different visits. So I have one for my first, second visit, and at different weeks here. If you have different goals or different things that you need to mention or prescribe, these can be used as reminders, but also maybe as a teaching tool or a tool to standardize how care is given in your clinic. So this can be an interesting tool for the clinic. Now, if I click through and add everything that I discussed with the patient, you'll see that as I keep clicking and adding new lines, this field here is simply extending down. So any information I want to add, I can add. I apologize. And I can keep adding new lines if needed. This field here, it's not really a field on the PDF, but I know that our MYLE users do use it to write some relevant information that they want to highlight, for instance. So you can add information here, for instance, if you prescribe blood work, that information can be added on the left side if it's something that you want to highlight. Now I'm going to show you how this would print. So if I go to the top header here, I have different options. I can share it to the portal if I want. I can print it or I can fax it. Let's say I want to fax it. When I click on fax, I'll generate the form. And now this select pages here is what lets me choose which pages I want to fax. Now this feature specifically is not available in the current version of MYLE. So when the feature is first deployed to you, you won't see this. You'll only be able to fax the full file. But it's an improvement request that was made during the pilot project, and we've included it. And so as soon as you get the next version of MYLE, which is version 2108, then you'll see that you can fax any page that you would like or any combination of pages. So for instance, at some point in the pregnancy, if I just want to fax page 4, I could select it in this way. And then you see that on my PDF version here, the treatment and remarks section also expanded down to accommodate all the text that I've written. Now I just have one line here, but as I add extra visits, they would get added on the bottom of this section. So I will cancel this and I will save my note and approve it. And I just want to come back to the patient summary here, and I want to show you a new feature that we added. And I have a typo here, but I just want to show you in the obstetrical history, we have this counter, the GTPAL and S counter that we have to indicate the number of pregnancies that the patient has had. And so now I've noticed that there was a mistake, and so I can come and modify that. And if I click on it here, I can come and indicate that actually the patient has had only 2 pregnancies. One is active and one was to term, and child is alive. So that information is stored in the file. And when I create a new obstetrical file, I also pull the latest information into the record. I also see who the last modification was done by, and I have an indicator that indicates whether the patient is pregnant or not. And so this is automatically toggled on as soon as you create a new patient obstetrical file, because if there's a new pregnancy, then the patient is probably pregnant. But if there's a miscarriage, or if you want to indicate that she's no longer pregnant, you can also toggle that off just by clicking here. If you don't want to do it manually, after we've passed 1 month after the estimated due date, we'll also just switch it off automatically for you. So that was documenting a first visit. I want to show you now how to document a follow-up visit. So I'll go back to my calendar. And now I have Felicia Weinberg, who's coming in for her second visit. So I'll go to her file. And once again, the nurse already documented the note and wrote the vital signs in it. So I can click here. And now if I modify the file, in my section now, you'll see that not only do I have a new pregnancy option, but I also have a follow-up visit option. We'll always leave both of these because maybe a couple months have passed since you last saw your patient, and since then she might have had a miscarriage or an abortion, and now she's coming with a new pregnancy. Or you could just do a follow-up visit, and that'll be a follow-up on the file that was last documented. So if I click follow-up here, and by default I'm brought to the 4th page, because that's normally where those visits are documented. But for this example, I want to document some results. So I can simply click on page 3 here. And I'm going to show you how to document dating ultrasound information. So this is like the previous pregnancies. We're only displaying one line, but as soon as we add information, so maybe the ultrasound was done on Monday. So as soon as I add a first information, a second line gets added, and that's up to 4 because that's the maximum amount of ultrasounds that we can document on the PDF file. Now, once I've added a date and an ultrasound age, you'll see that my Use for Dating button here, it gets active. So I can click on it and I can decide to use this information for my dating ultrasound. And once I do that, once I select this information, if I go back to page 4, you'll see that my estimated due date is now according to my ultrasound before 20 weeks, because that's the information that I just selected as dating. So it gets documented automatically for you based on the calculation, and it gets selected. Then this information that's for last menstrual period, it doesn't get removed. It stays there if you still want to reference it. So now if I add a new visit, so if not only do I have results for my patient, but she's also in front of me, I can click to add a new visit, and you'll see that today's date gets added. The weeks of gestation get added automatically, and these are calculated based on the new information. So we won't ever overwrite information that was previously documented and recalculate it based on the new information. This one will stay based on the date of last menstrual period because that's the only information we had at the moment. But the new visit here, this information gets calculated based on the ultrasound information that's selected here. And if ever you have a third information or another ultrasound that you want to document, you can do it manually, or you can add in a new dating ultrasound in page 3. So you also have other sections here that you can use. And then once again, I could document my visit. I just want to show you other clickable text because I really think you should use them. They're great. So you can say that prenatal screening was done and echo dating, or you can come add different information here and type as well if you want to. So that sums up my follow-up visit, and that's all there is to know about the obstetrical file. I can imagine you have a couple questions, and I've anticipated some, so I'm just going to go through some frequently asked questions, and then we'll get to your specific ones after that. So first of all, what's the best way to transition to the new module? We can't transfer any of the information that's on PDF to the new module. That's something that we can't do. So what we suggest is that you continue to document any current pregnancies that you've already started. You keep documenting them on the PDF forms, but all new pregnancies that come into the clinic, you can document in the new antenatal module. So in theory, within 9 months, you shouldn't be documenting on the PDFs anymore, and you should have completely transitioned to the new obstetrical module. What information is retrieved from one pregnancy to the next? So once you're documenting your second pregnancy for the same patient in the new antenatal module, we can recuperate information that was documented on the first antenatal record that you documented. So any family antecedents, any previous pregnancies, even the rubella immunity, if the patient was positive in the previous obstetrical record, we can pull out that information and put it automatically into the new record. Of course, if you have modifications to make, if there's a new diagnosis to add in the family history, you can also add that information manually. Also, we gave you a quick link to import the personal history of the patient if it was documented in the last record. So we won't put it automatically because not everyone wants to reuse that information. Some would rather start from scratch and re-ask the questions. But if you do want to pull in the patient's personal antecedents, there'll be a link that will let you reuse that information. Is it possible to make changes to the Ministry of Health and Social Services form? Now, this is something that came up a lot in the pilot project. There are often cases where you would like to document some extra information, or you find that 5 lines for previous pregnancies aren't enough because often the patient has had more than that, or even only 4 lines for ultrasounds might not be enough. Unfortunately, we contacted the ministry, and I spoke to the committee that's in charge of the obstetrical record, and I pointed out all the changes that were requested by our users, but they won't allow us to make the changes within MYLE. So they insist that our obstetrical record within MYLE be exactly the same as in the PDF version. That's the latest version that they've published. So we're not allowed to make the changes. However, they do know that some changes are to make. They're conscious that the form is imperfect, and they do plan on changing and making improvements to the form, but they don't yet have a date to tell us when that might happen. As soon as they do make changes, I promise that we'll make them in MYLE so that we always stay up to date, but we unfortunately can't go ahead without the ministry first doing so. How do I indicate on the record that my patient is no longer pregnant? So I showed this a bit earlier, but I'm just going to remind you. From the summer, you have access to a pop-up to update the details of pregnancies. And so from there, it's also possible to indicate that the patient is currently pregnant. So as a reminder, that toggle is automatically activated when you create a new obstetrical record, and it's also automatically deactivated 1 month after the expected delivery date. But if you have the information that the patient is no longer pregnant, and that happens before the estimated due date, for instance, then you can simply open the pop-up and click on the toggle here to deactivate this indicator. And so that'll let everyone know that the patient is no longer pregnant. Which calculation is used for the estimated due date? So there are two calculations we use. There's the first one for the due date based on date of last menstrual period and cycle length. So for that due date, what we do is we take the date of last menstrual period and we add to that the cycle length minus 14 days. So that's the ovulation date. And from then we add 38 weeks. And from that, we get the estimated due date. And just as a reminder, I mentioned earlier that the cycle length, you can override that and ignore it in our calculation. And so if you choose to ignore the cycle length for the calculation, we'll base this off of a 28-day cycle, and that'll give you the most classic calculation for the estimated due date. For the estimated due date according to the ultrasound age, what we do is we take the date of the ultrasound and we add to that 40 weeks minus the ultrasound age. And so that's basically what's left for the duration of the pregnancy. So that added to the date of the ultrasound gives us the estimated due date. And just for your information, I didn't come up with these by myself. I had a lot of help from different users, and I thank them because they were a huge help to me getting all of this information right. When will the feature be deployed? So starting next Monday, we're going to start gradually deploying the feature. We never deploy it all at once. We go by steps and by small groups. So in about 2 weeks, everyone should have the new feature in MYLE. We'll be sending out a communication to let you know that it's been deployed, and you'll also be able to notice it within the form section of the note as soon as the feature is there. That was it for the questions that I had prepared. I don't know if any others have come up during the presentation, so I will let my colleague Elodie ask any if they have come up.
Yes, we have 3 questions. So the first one is it possible to add therapeutic abortion and spontaneous abortion as method of delivery?
That's a question we've had, and I consulted other users. It's sort of ambiguous because on page 1, these are methods of delivery, and some would say that an abortion isn't necessarily a method of delivery. We could ask more users. At the moment, it's not within the list, but of course, nothing stops you from just typing it. But it's something that we could look into, and it's something that we could add if other users also feel that that would be something that would be useful.
The second one, where can we add any extra blood works like HbA1c or HGB, electrophoresis, or HCV?
As I was saying earlier, and I know this is a request that comes up often, this form doesn't really have extra room, and the ministry won't let us add any new fields or any extra information. So I would recommend that you keep doing as you would on the PDF version. I know some might reuse some sections that aren't necessarily for that, but unfortunately within MYLE we're not allowed to actually add any new fields that aren't on the PDF original version.
Is there dedicated space for placental localization or space for comments on the ultrasound in page 3?
Absolutely, and we're actually seeing it here. So this is all my information for the ultrasound. This is for placental localization, and this is extra room for additional comments. So these are all associated to the ultrasound, and you'll see my empty line here also has them, and if I add a new one, I get a third line with third empty. So these are all, this full line here is for the ultrasound.
Okay, the last one, we will work towards having blood work results automatically imported.
Yes, it's something that we want to do. We would like to be able to automatically pull in results. At the moment, we're a bit limited by how lab information is distributed within Quebec. So unfortunately, codification for lab results isn't standardized province-wide. So if I'm receiving a hemoglobin result from a given lab, it won't be codified in the same way as if I'm receiving it from a different lab in a different region in Quebec, for instance. So we can't confidently say that when we're receiving a result, it should go in this section, because there's so many different ways to receive hemoglobin information. The good news is that Quebec is starting an effort to centralize all that information and standardize throughout the province how the information and how different results are codified. So once that is done, it'll be much easier for us to come and integrate the values automatically within the file.
That was the last question that we have. So thank you everyone for attending today's presentation, and please feel free to contact us by calling or emailing us if you have any further question. Please note that the replay of this presentation will be available on our knowledge base starting Monday. And just as a reminder that our technical support team is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So you can reach at them if you have any question. And you can also follow us on social media to find out about latest news and MYLE updates and much more. Thank you.